Today I want to think about creation, not just as an interdependent whole, but as the radiance of God, and touch on two ways of inquiring into the nature of created things, which can help us come through grace to an ever deepening awareness of this. And I'm calling these two ways deep looking and deep listening. And we'll explore all of this more fully during the half-day retreat in July, together with how this awareness, this deep looking and deep listening, translates into seeing, hearing, and loving those around us. Many of you will know that since the earliest centuries, the earliest Christian centuries, Christians have spoken of the visible material world, pointing to an invisible immaterial source and harmony in God. And the late 5th and early 6th century Pseudo-Dionysius wrote that for those who are awake, even perfumes as they strike our senses represent spiritual illumination. And his words echo those of St. Paul in Romans, that ever since the creation of the world, the invisible attributes of eternal power and divinity have been able to be understood and perceived in what he has made. The world is seen to be the manifestation of God. Although Paul goes on to say, of course, that people didn't see this. They were unable to read the book of creation, which St. Augustine called the first Bible. And not seeing creation, including themselves as the radiance, as the glory of God, they chose to worship things in themselves. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the 4th century, said that as he put it, the partially developed mind believes that the beautiful things it encounters are beautiful in their own nature, but that someone who has purified the eyes of his soul, the eyes of the mind, and is trained to see beautiful things, makes use of the visible as a springboard to rise to contemplation of the spiritual. But needless to say, we have a great deal of difficulty grasping the fact that created matter bears witness to the invisible source of life. We're encouraged by our culture to affirm and cling to what presents itself directly to our senses, that is, to what is material, and deny or ignore what presents itself indirectly in and through the material, that is, the immaterial source through whom all things were created. So how might we come to encounter creation as divine radiance, as the invisible written down in the visible, and be less reliant on what books and other people, like me, have to say about all this? How do we come to know this in our own experience? Evagrius Ponticus, the 4th century master of the contemplative life, records this short tale of St. Anthony, the father of monasticism. And it goes, one of the wise men of that time went to find the holy man Anthony and asked him, "Father, how can you be so happy when you are deprived of the consolation that books give?" Anthony replied, "My philosopher friend, my book is the nature of creatures. And this book is always in front of me when I want to read the words of God. To the contemplative eye, everything is a word spoken by God." So how might reading the nature of creatures, as Anthony put it, help us to see that created form bears witness to its invisible creator? Well, first, I want to look briefly at deep looking, an analytical way of inquiry into the nature of created things, which asks questions of them. And then we'll move on to look briefly at the deep listening of meditation, which requires us to lay all our analytical tools to one side and wait in expectant silence for God to enlighten us. Deep looking helps us understand things intellectually. And it helps us understand something intellectually that can be disturbing for some and a source of extraordinary wonder for others. Think of a rose. Is a rose the flower? Is a rose the leaves? Is a rose the stem? Or is a rose the pink or red or yellow we see? Or think of a bicycle. Is a bicycle the handlebar, or the seat, or the wheels, or any other part of it? Rose and bicycle are names we give for a unity of elements that have come together in a certain way. And this very simple analysis, this very ancient form of analysis, shows that what we call the rose, what we call the bicycle, are dependent on all the elements that form them. They do not have a separate being of their own. And all the elements that go to make them are also dependent on the smaller elements that have come together in a certain way to form them. And however far you want to go with this line of inquiry, you find that even the smallest elements are found to be empty of their own separate being and do not cause themselves. Which means, of course, that the various combinations of elements which come together to form the extraordinary diversity of creation, whether that's an ant or the person next to you or a pint of beer, are all empty of separate being and do not cause themselves. And this is true, of course, for us. Hence, St. Paul can say in Galatians, if anyone thinks himself to be something while he is nothing, he is deceiving himself. He doesn't mean not anything at all. He means something in and of their own power. As we read in Exodus, only God can say, I am who am. We and all other created beings have to say, I am what is given to me. And the extraordinary point of wonder for the Christian might be this. If we are empty of separate self-being, and yet evidently here, it means that we are ceaselessly receiving our being. We are ceaselessly receiving the self-gift of God. God is, as it were, always feeding us himself. And so we bear witness to the invisible source of life simply through being here. Deep looking can help us understand things intellectually. That all the created things we encounter in the world do not have any separate being of their own. But how do we come to know this as a home truth, fully? That every person, every raindrop, every flower, is nothing but the grace-filled gift of ever-present, infinite, overflowing divine love. How can we come to know in our own experience that everything in the whole universe is nothing else than the self-gift of the divine, ceaselessly spoken into being by the Word, the Logos, through whom all things came into being, and without whom not one thing came into being. To know this in our own experience is to be crucified with Christ, to be liberated from the notion, from the burden of the idea of separate self-being, of being separate from God and each other. To step into a place where we are free to say with St. Paul, I live, no longer I, but Christ lives in me. One. We cannot bring about this experience through our own striving. It's all in God's hands. But meditation, deep listening, is an excellent way of disposing ourselves towards this grace. Love brings us to this threshold, at which point the analytical mind must lay down its precious tools and become silent, and proceed by means of a simple, loving intention that has left all concepts by the doorway and is content to let God take over completely. And by way of leading us into our time of meditation, I'd like to read some lines by St. Augustine I read to those of us who came together on Saturday for the weekly meditation practice. And I hope anyone who was there on Saturday will forgive me, but I think they're worth hearing countless times. His words allow us to share in a precious moment he shared with his beloved mother, Monica, shortly before she died, as they were looking out from the window of their house in Ostia on the Tiber, where they were staying on their way back to Africa. Beautiful words that convey the heart of meditation, the work that we do, and the grace of contemplation, the gift of seeing clearly. Augustine writes, we were on our own, talking, and our conversation was easy and happy. And we asked ourselves what the life of your saints would be like. That life which no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor heart has conceived. We place the mouths of our hearts at the stream of divine water that flows from the fountain of life, which is you. I'll just read that again. It's just astonishingly beautiful, I think. We place the mouths of our hearts at the stream of divine water that flows from the fountain of life, which is you. Then we said, if the tumult within us could be silent, if the thoughts and images of earth, of water, and of air, and of the heavens were to be silent, and even if our very soul became so silent that we no longer thought of ourselves, so that we might pass beyond self, if dreams and all the fantasies of our imagination were silent, and if every tongue and every noise were hushed, and all things that are merely passing in this world grew silent. If we could but listen, all these things would say to us, we did not make ourselves. The one who made us abides forever. To the contemplative heart, everything is singing the glory of God. All creation, and each of us, from the tiniest single-cell organism to the most frustrating person at the office, bears witness to the invisible source of life. Simply by being here, we are the invisible made visible, the radiance of God. We are the song that God is singing, which, despite appearances sometimes, is always a harmony. Now for our time of meditation. As I like to say, we meditate to be taken by grace into the truth, to know the truth, to be restored to ourselves and restored to each other. But by being healed, we can bring God's healing love to others. So let's turn to God with a simple loving intention in silence and place the mouth of our hearts at the stream of divine water that flows from the fountain of life. So make sure that you're sitting comfortably with your back as straight as you're able, with your body still but relaxed and alert. Take a few slow, deep breaths to gather your attention and still yourself. And then take a word, a prayer word or short phrase to recite in your mind, silently, interiorly, in time with your breathing. It might be love or peace, thy will be done. But just recite it silently with the in-breath and with the out-breath. Or simply focus on your breath and follow it flowing in and out through your nose, whatever works for you. We use the prayer word just to help focus our mind, to help bring us to stillness. And whenever you notice your attention has followed a thought or feeling, don't be concerned, don't tell yourself off. Just as soon as you notice, gently take your attention back to the practice, back to reciting your word and following your breath. That's all you need to do. We can trust that God does the rest. I'll strike a bell to begin our time of meditation, and again when it's time to finish. Thank you. You meditated a little bit longer than I intended. If anybody would like now to ask any questions or share any comments, you're very welcome. Hello, can you hear me now? Excellent. I'm sorry. Forgive me for, I did ring the bell several times, but I found that I'd been muted as well and couldn't unmute myself. Thank you.